Alright, so now we're going to talk about the Great Depression and the New Deal. The 1920s, like I mentioned earlier, experienced a lot of growth and productivity. However, the 1930s weren't so lucky. The stock market actually crashed on Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. The stock market crash ushered in the Great Depression, which was riddled with business failures, unemployment, and skyrocketed inflation. Although the stock market crash was the main reason for the Great Depression, it wasn't the only reason. The expenses of World War I, a shady banking policy, and decline in trade, and a rise of borrowing credit also contributed to the Great Depression happening. Also, I mentioned earlier Herbert Hoover was president at the time, and he believed in the powers of laissez-faire since it had worked so well in the 1920s. Remember, laissez-faire is just this economic ideology of where the government completely stays out of the economy, and the government just kind of lets the economy be free without any form of regulation. So Hoover basically left recovery up to individual initiative, and he refused to offer government assistance. And as a result of Hoover not taking any action, Hoovervilles were basically sprang up all across America, and Hoovervilles were basically communities of rundown shacks where many homeless people lived. In 1932, the public hated Republicans because Herbert Hoover was a Republican and they were in a huge depression, and so they naturally elected the other party, which was the Democratic Party, and the person running at the time was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. FDR's reform policies were part of his New Deal plan to kind of get the country back on the right track and get out of the Depression. During FDR's first 100 days in office, FDR wanted to give Americans relief through providing money, jobs, and loans. FDR wanted to recover America by passing legislation to help businesses and agriculture. Lastly, he wanted to reform America and reform the banks to ensure their stability. He's famous for saying the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. FDR used John Maynard Keynes' philosophy of spending money in order to return to prosperity. FDR spent millions on helping the people get back on their feet. And his New Deal brought about a minimum wage, unemployment insurance, and Social Security. Next, we'll go on and move to World War II. Hitler rose to power in Germany, and Mussolini rose to power in Italy. Germany violated the Munich Conference of 1939 by invading Poland in 1939, which of course prompted Britain and France to declare war on Germany. U.S. wanted to remain neutral once again, but we all know that doesn't happen very often. So basically, during this time, the Allies consisted of Britain, France, and Russia, and the Axis consisted of Germany, Italy, and Japan. Congress wanted to make sure the U.S. doesn't get involved again in another world war, so they basically passed the Neutrality Acts of 1935 through 1937, which forbade selling weapons or giving loans to the nations involved in the war. It also prohibited U.S. citizens from traveling on the ships of countries at war. And they obviously did this to kind of, not go through what they had to go through during World War I, where they were forced to kind of join the war. In 1939, the Neutrality Acts were amended to allow sale of weapons on a cash and carry basis. Cash and carry basically meant that nations could buy weapons from America, but they had to ship them themselves. Then later on in 1941, the Lend-Lease Act basically expanded the power of the president to lend, lease, sell, exchange, etc. to get weapons and supplies to nations that serve the interests of the U.S., i.e. the Allies, basically. So by 1940, FDR won his third term as president under the notion that it would be dangerous to change presidencies in the wake of a depression and possible war. So FDR won his fourth term in 1944 under that same notion, because it would be dangerous to change the president during a world war going on and, the economic depression. FDR also gave the military permission to to shoot German submarines, which was not really typical of a country trying to practice isolationism. Also, FDR died during presidency, and Harry Truman took over. Truman took America to the conclusion of the war, basically, and I'm sure you guys all know December 7th, 1941 is when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, causing America to join the war on the side of the Allies. So once again, America found itself to be in the World War. The home front is basically a term used to describe the job of everyday Americans here in America. Support for World War II was high among Americans because they feel like they were threatened and didn't deserve to be attacked by Japan. So they felt like it was their duty to go and attack, the Axis powers that which Japan was part of. Women went to work over jobs, and they took over jobs that many of the men who went to fight the war had originally, and a woman who went to work was given the nickname Rosie the Riveter. There was also rationing of meat, sugar, leather, and other items needed for the military at the time. The war came to a conclusion on 1945 when the Allied troops marched into Berlin. Hitler heard of the capture of Berlin and is supposedly known to have committed suicide. The U.S. also told Japan to surrender. Japan refused to surrender, so the U.S. decided to drop a couple atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then Japan decided to surrender. Remember, the Allied powers consisted of Britain, France, America, and Russia. Also remember, America, which was democratic, and Russia, which was communist, hated each other. And when it came time to divide up the land gained from World War II, Germany was basically split right down the middle in Berlin, and the Berlin Wall was made, basically dividing Western Berlin, which was democratic, and Eastern Berlin, which was communist. And lastly, the Nuremberg Trials took place, which they were basically a series of trials where Nazis were prosecuted for crimes against humanity. Of course, the crimes against humanity was the Holocaust.